The first meeting with Gene Lessman went as follows, according to Lue's book. You're being considered for a government position. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Thus began one of the most rapid interrogations I'd ever experienced. Where was I from? What did I do when I wasn't on post? Who were my parents? Why is it important to serve my country? How about remote viewing? Know what that is? Nope. Apparently, Gene Lessman was a part of Project Stargate, the US military's remote viewing program. Remote viewing is the alleged ability to access data and information about given targets at a distance. And the US government has funded various remote viewing programs over the decades, with the accuracy and usability of this process being contested along the way. The remote viewing program in the US began in the 1970s at Stanford Research Institute under the direction of Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ.
Uri Geller, this is Edgar Mitchell, who, with his eyes covered, is trying to pick up the number that Geller is sending. Also, we see Wilbur Franklin of Kent State, Harold Puthoff, and Russell Targ of SRI, along with Don Schuick, Vice President for Research at SRI. Dr. Schuick is trying to receive and then write down the number that Geller is sending. In this case, Schuick is successful in picking up the number.
Russell Targ would describe remote viewing as follows.
They called it remote viewing.
For the past 10 years, we've been investigating a phenomenon called remote viewing. In this experimental series, which has been carried on now with hundreds of subjects in the laboratory, we found that many individuals are able to accurately describe what's going on in distant locations.
The remote viewing program went by many names. One of them was called Stargate. Before that, it was called Grill Flame, etc., and began really in the late 1960s, early 1970s, led by a gentleman, one of my former colleagues actually, Dr. Hal Puthoff, who actually worked at the time with Stanford University and created what is now known as the, quote, psychic spy program for the Central Intelligence Agency. And those techniques were quite effective. There's a lot of information to substantiate that, yeah, actually the program did work, even though it was eventually shut down due to budgetary concerns.
I think it is worth noting that a lot of the first batch of remote viewers at Stanford Research Institute were Scientologists. And some of the practices of remote viewing were derived from Scientology, the religion created by L. Ron Hubbard.
I am the writer of the textbooks of Scientology.
It should also be noted that Scientology drew a lot of its stuff from old, ancient practices as well. This is not support for Scientology in any way, but it is worth noting. Hal Puthoff, Ingo Swann, and Pat Price, all part of the early remote viewing program, were OT7 Scientologists, the highest level at the time. Ingo Swann is recorded as saying there were a total of 14 Scientology clears in the remote viewing program. Some debate as to the degree Hal Puthoff was a Scientologist, as today he has renounced it. But Hal Puthoff wrote a long letter in support of Scientology in 1970, and he and his wife were married in a Scientologist church in the 1970s. Puthoff also wrote the preface to L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology, a Religion. According to his book, Lue Elizondo would not meet Hal Puthoff until 2008, about a decade after the time we are covering now. But this is how Lue Elizondo would explain Hal Scientology's escapades to his then friend Jeremy McGowan.
Right there, that I had this concern. Hal appears to have been in Scientology. I was just reading a Wikipedia article. Didn't really know any background. It was interesting, again, looking back, to see how Lue defended that. And he told me, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the direct quote, but he told me that Hal Puthoff had been assigned to Scientology by the CIA because the CIA wanted Hal to acquire the technology that the Scientologists used to test the Thetans or whatever it was. So Lue was either believing it, regurgitating it, or lying, I don't know which, and telling me that Hal was not really that involved in Scientology and he was only there at the behest of the CIA.
As I said, in his book, Elizondo would claim meeting Hal Puthoff around 2008. But there are some rumors out there that he has actually known him for decades.
What I know is that I've been told by people who worked directly shoulder to shoulder with Lue Elizondo, their mouth to my ears is that Lue Elizondo has known Hal Puthoff for decades, is what I was told directly. And then I saw someone tweeted, Kate Howland, I think her name is, who's a big, UFO fan and Elizondo fan. She says that Lue gave her one of his psychic journals or psychic manuals is what it is, and there's a photo of it, and it's from the 80s. It's from it's dated 1986, I believe. Look it up. You could zoom in and it's there it is. It's this psychic manual she claims Elizondo gave. So I think Lue potentially wasn't as forthcoming.
As I said, Hal Puthoff would denounce Scientology eventually, and the program would bring in many more people that weren't Scientologists. But there is no denying that it was a part of the program's history, and Elizondo would not include this history of Scientology when discussing the history of the US remote viewing programs. Nevertheless, over the years, the program would bounce around from the CIA to the DIA to the Army and various other places.
In the US government, it's called Stargate. They were taking young soldiers and civilians and they were training them to conduct espionage behind enemy lines. And the term was called remote viewing. A lot of people that were...
And Lue would note that the program did have successes over the years, mentioning when President Jimmy Carter spoke of the remote viewing program locating a downed airplane in Africa.
We had a small plane go down somewhere in Africa, and we were not able to find it by surveillance. So the director of the CIA heard about a woman in California that was a medium or something. I don't know the title for. And she gave him the latitude and longitude of the plane's whereabouts. We located the plane where she said it was. And that's the only time that I have ever experienced something that was inexplicable while I was present.
As well as mentioning that government remote viewers were used in the Middle East.
But Cairo has confirmed that the Defense Intelligence Agency did use psychics during the Gulf War. A key U.S. official told us the program was used to give intelligence leads during the whole Desert Storm period. It was part of $1 million a year psychic intelligence project, just the latest in a long string of secret American research. Stansfield Turner became director of the CIA in 1977. There he learned that the agency had once employed a successful psychic.
He had drawn some pictures of places in the Soviet Union that he had never been and which seemed to turn out to be accurate.
By the time Elizondo had begun training with Gene Lessman, the existence of the secretive Stargate program was public.
Is. Now, it's hard to believe that someone could be trained to sit in a room, zero in on a blind target, and come up with accurate information about something that is somewhere else in space and time. But we watched it for ourselves. It's called remote viewing, and the U.S. military spent $20 million to develop this mind-boggling technique.
Not only was Project Stargate public, it was closed down. And Elizondo says Gene Lessman was trying to keep a small crater together in the hopes of reopening it. According to Elizondo, Gene Lessman would train him how to remote view. An excerpt from the book reads, "Sometimes Gene would give me an envelope and ask me to describe the location mentioned inside. Only I couldn't open the envelope. A day later, he'd changed the procedure slightly. I was to direct my attention to a photograph Gene was holding, but I could not see. Before we started, he verbally gave me the geographical coordinates of the objects in question. With practice, I got better. I would take the techniques I learned with me to subsequent assignments. After a while, remote viewing became second nature to me. I was able to put myself into the zone without any sort of protocol or ritual." Elizondo would continue about his conversations with Gene Lessman during this time. "I'm not gifted," I'd say. "Oh, yes, you are," Gene would respond. Turns out we were both right. The reality was a large number of the population was and is capable of remote viewing. The training was rare, not the gift.
I was taught early on some techniques by one of the top Army's remote viewers. Wonderful gentleman, very, very gifted. Sadly, I was not that gifted, but it turns out that a lot of people have that capability. And it's really, I think, once you talk to some of the scientists, you realize it's not paranormal like people suggest it is. It's probably just some sort of latent capability that humans have had for a very long time before we really were able to verbalize communication with one another, and it became very sophisticated. Dogs, for example, when they come across and they see each other, there's some sort of nonverbal communication, and some scientists are speculating maybe that's a form of, we call it psychic, but in reality, it's just a normal part of human interactions, and a lot of people can do it.
Lue would say, when the best remote viewers were in the zone, they could penetrate enemy installations and have a look around. They could locate personnel or vital assets. They could even allegedly disrupt or incapacitate the minds of adversaries. Another weird thing Lue would say about remote viewing is this. An interesting thing about remote viewing is that it must be used for purely good intentions and not for bad or for personal or selfish gain. Call it karma or something else. All remote viewers learn this one way or another. Before Lue could officially join any kind of remote viewing program, he says the program closed. And Lue would write in his book, "Remote viewing deserves science, not scorn, yet closed-minded zealots stormed in and trampled Stargate to death." In the waning days of the program, one member of Stargate was stunned to hear a government supervisor's reason for opposing, saying, "You are working with people who are in league with the devil." It is not good for the United States or humanity to have these sorts of closed-minded officials who reflexively fight and dismiss anything that questions their personal religious beliefs. To say it holds back progress and growth is an understatement. Lue says that Gene Lessman would be told the remote viewing program would not reopen, and Lue would not be joining any official program. Lue claims he would come to utilize his remote viewing skills at various times in his career, which we will cover later. But for now, Lue's time remote viewing in any sort of official, unofficial capacity would come to an end. And Lue Elizondo's career path would take a new route following the September 11th terrorist attacks.
We've seen it from the front angle before, but not from this angle.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations